I am putting together another DIY mini pond today, and I want to show you a very basic way that I pot up the pond plants using a very inexpensive and simple yet effective potting media that is great for these mini ponds. And it also works well for the large ponds. I even use it on my aquariums sometimes. So these mini ponds don't have to be expensive. You can still get beautiful results. The pots that I like to use are 1 gallon plastic ones used by plant nurseries to grow their stock. They are lightweight, durable, very inexpensive, and reusable. Most people just throw them away, but I like to repurpose them for projects like this. I use the tip of a hot glue gun to make a few holes in the top rims of these pots, which will come into play later. And you can make holes in the sides for improved water movement, but this is not critical. Next, I line the pot with a section of garden or landscape weed fabric, which will keep our media from falling out of the drain holes. Now, the media I like to use is baked clay in the form of either unscented, non-clumping kitty litter, like Special Kitty brand, or Safety Zorb oil absorbent. Now, both are 100% natural clay and perfectly safe to use. Now, some may prefer one over the other, but they both work equally well in my experience, and they both cost about the same. I fill the pot up about halfway with the media and then put in some Osmocote, which is a slow release fertilizer, maybe a teaspoon's worth. Another option is to use fertilizer tabs made for pond plants, which I use sometimes also. Now, both work very well. The Osmocote is less expensive per plant. I also use both of these fertilizers in my aquariums, either in a deep substrate or when growing plants in smaller pots. Now let's take our plant, in this case variegated water celery, hold it in the pot and fill the rest of it up with the clay, but not quite to the top. At this point is a good time to trim off the excess weed fabric down to the rim or slightly below. Now, for the remaining inch or so of space in the pot, I like to put a layer of either sand or pea gravel, partly for aesthetics, but also because it's heavier than the clay particles and just helps keep things in place, generally speaking. I repeat this same process with the second pot, except in this one I'm planting dwarf equisetum, which is a smaller version of the iconic and taller equisetum, also known as horsetail, which is popular for larger ponds. In our pond container itself, I've drilled some holes along the rim that we will hang the pots from using UV-resistant zip ties, which will easily last a year before needing to be replaced. I even have some that have been holding plants for almost 3 years now. I like using zip ties instead of making a shelf of stacked bricks or something like that, because it saves so much space in the container and you don't have to worry about the plants falling over. I thread the zip ties through the pond rim and the holes I made in the rim of the plant pots, but I zip up the tie just enough so that the pots are hanging close to where I want the water line to be. So I'm leaving some slack in the zip ties and not fastening them all the way. After hanging these pots, I'm not quite happy with the spacing of the holes in the pond rim. These pots are not quite snug against the back of the pond. So I'm going to drill another hole for each pot and thread another zip tie in each one so the pots are not leaning forward so much. After setting the pond up on the patio, I put about an inch of pea gravel in the bottom and then fill it up with water. Next, I plant some sprigs of creeping jenny around the rim of the pots, and they will eventually grow out and hide it. I like to use other low-growing plants to accomplish this too, like ajuga, varieties of pennywort, even Java moss works well, and of course there are still others that work well also. And every pond needs some floating plants, like frogbit. Eventually the creeping jenny will cover the water also. Well, I am so glad that spring is on the way. I've got so many more plants to pot up and more of these mini ponds to build. Be sure to check out this next video where I build one of these little ponds with a natural stone waterfall.